Well, welcome to another edition of It's All Good. It's our podcast. I'm Lucas. I'm with my best friend Eric. And with all the crazy stuff going on in the world, I think today, Eric, we can talk about things about reflecting on ourselves, how we can improve ourselves. I know you're a big fan of that. And so we're going to talk about that today. You okay with that?
Yeah, my favorite topic, so this will be great.
So today we're going to talk about self-improvement. And so here it is, January. Let's think about that. The very first of January, a lot of us make these big goals, what we're going to do for the next year, and resolutions. And sometimes halfway through January, you screw up, and your resolution is done because you've already done something you said weren't going to do for a whole year. And sometimes in life, we take it serious and we're like, well, I screwed that up, so I guess I can't do that anymore. I remember my wife made a New Year's resolution to not get a speeding ticket for the whole year. And guess what day she got a speeding ticket? January 1st. It was incredible. It was unbelievable. I couldn't believe it was happening, and it happened. So with that in mind, thinking that when we make our goals that, some of us have black and white. There's no gray area. And so when we break those resolutions, we get down on ourselves. I watched this Netflix show called Game Changer, and I told you about it, and you watched it too, right, Eric?
Yep, I did.
So it's about nutrition. And after watching it, I said to myself, I'm going to go vegan. And by the way, those are three words I never thought I would ever say in my life. I am going vegan. Well, for 2 weeks straight, I went vegan. And then after the second week, I ate something with dairy in it. And I felt like, well, I guess I'm not vegan anymore because I ate something with cheese in it. And so I can't be vegan anymore. So my mindset was all wrong. So, but I feel like, the change that I'm trying to make is, at least with my diet, is that majority of my diet is going to be plants. And once in a while, I'll have some dairy and have some meat. I'm not going to go all or nothing. And I still get, the change that I want without beating myself up. And I said, a lot of us have these things that are unattainable. Sometimes we set these goals that are unattainable. And so Eric has told me about this principle that you were saying, improve 1% better every day. And I want you to expand and tell us all about how that works and what that looks like.
So this comes from the author James Clear. James is a great author. If you haven't read, if you read one book this year, I would suggest reading Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he talks a little bit about why he named it Atomic Habits, because an atom is really the smallest measurable, or one of the smallest measurable things we look at, and yet it can have a tremendous impact. But he talks about the 1%, and he begins a lot of his seminars, and even in the book, and he says if we look at just getting 1% better every day for a year, and we run that out for a year, he says we become 30 times better that year. Now, he says in converse, if you become 1% worse every day, you relegate yourself almost to nothing by the end of the year. And then he pushes it out to 2 years. So 2 years, if you figure, okay, we're 37% better in 1 year. At year 2, we are now 1,400% better. Year 3, 53,000% better. Year 4, 2 million times better. And if you go to 5 years, you literally are going to break the Google spreadsheet. It's like it's a 998 it is the biggest number I've ever seen. So his idea is we need to just focus on getting a little bit better. And when you talked about we have these goals, and the goals that we have are typically goals that have to do with becoming or achieving a specific thing or an event. And he says we really have it wrong. We need to focus on becoming. You don't have a goal to, I'm going to write a book this year. You have a goal that I'm going to become a writer. You don't have a goal that I'm going to become, I'm going to finally lose the weight that I need to. You focus on, I'm going to become a better eater. Because he says, basically the actions that we take on a daily basis will predict where you're going to be in the next 6 months, year, 18 months, and so forth. And he said it's a compounding principle. A lot of times, if we don't achieve something, our brains are so used to things happening so fast because we watch Extreme Weight Loss with Chris and Heidi, my nephew and niece, and we see somebody lose 300 pounds in an hour. We know that didn't take place in an hour. I mean, when we think about it, but our brain saw it happen in an hour. And so we have a very difficult time patiently achieving goals because they're going to take time. And so that 1% is just focusing on a little bit at a time. Now, you mentioned you broke the vegan. And he has a great antidote to that because he says Jerry Seinfeld years ago was in a comedy club, and he was pretty successful, and a young comedian asked him, how are you so successful? And he said, I focus on not breaking the chain. And, this obviously created some intrigue. And he said, I spend 10 to 15 minutes a day or whatever it takes to write one joke a day. And on my calendar, I put a red X. Now, James takes it further. Jerry went on for years and never broke the chain. But James says a lot of us are going to break the chain. But he says rule 2 with this is you never skip 2 days. So say, you did a day where you did dairy. He says, okay, you get a no red X that day. You do not skip the next day. And he says if we just apply that principle, we are doing what we want to do or the lifestyle that we would eventually like to get 50%, which is way better than most people will do the rest of their lives. But most have a bad day, and then they're done. It's sabotage. Oh, I'm a failure. It's over. Why even try? And so those are 2 big principles.
I love both of those principles. And you mentioned something that I think at least clicks with me, and I don't know if it clicks with everybody, but when we're talking about achieving things and changing and all those things, for me, I have to actually see it on a paper or on a board, and I have to be able to, like you said, actually check it off physically, watching my hand check it off as I'm doing it. And the next day when I go look at it, I can see my progression and what I've missed and what I haven't missed. And for me, for some reason, I don't know if that's a mental thing or some people can do it without doing that. And just, is that something that physically our mind, if we see or that we have to have something that we physically do to check off these boxes and actually write things down? Or can you just have it go on your mind and you keep scoring your mind?
There is a psychological component of reward by checking off things. Stephen Covey years ago and Hiram Smith, that the basic founders of Franklin Covey, there was this great power that they saw in these daytimers when people would check things off. It actually gives us a dopamine response in our brain to check it off. And James says the important part of developing habits that eventually develop the character that you want to have. And he says, always remember, you're not developing habits to obtain a thing or to write a book or to become 6%. You're developing habits to become that type of a person, a writer, a runner, an athlete. And he says that the important part is realizing you've got to have rewards along the way. And sometimes a simple check mark is a reward. Your brain releases this little bit of dopamine. And I always like to say something that Brian Johnson taught me, that, when I check it off, that's like me. That's like me. Whenever we do things right or something that is a habit that is developing the character that we want, go ahead in your mind and just say, that's like me. That's like me. Even if we haven't obtained that type of character yet, that's like me. And those little reinforcements will allow you to have enough reward in the moment that will continue to evolve that habit. And eventually that habit becomes who you are. I mean, in essence, repeatedly, those habits are what we're going to be in 10 to 15 years. And we sometimes don't realize that. We just think we're going to become something this month or next month, and it just doesn't happen that way.
So I know that you're a huge fan of quotes. You have quotes all over your office, inspirational quotes. I read a quote this morning that really hit me. And I'm not really a quote guy, but this got me. It says, to reach a goal you have never before attained, you must do things you have never before done. And that's from Richard G. Scott. As I'm thinking about that, I thought about all the times in my life when I've achieved something, a goal or something that I've set out to do. It wasn't anything that was in my comfort zone. It wasn't anything that, I've done before, like writing the book that I wrote. I never thought I could be an author. I never thought I would write a book. And so I started doing things that I've never done before. I started researching that. I started writing, editing. I started thinking and going into my room for hours at a time in silence and letting things pop into my head and write things down. So I'm trying to figure out how to achieve and like you said, you have to put into action. Things have to go into action. What motivates us to get into action to be able to do things? Because a lot of us will have goals and these things that we want to do, and we want to improve 1% every day. But how do we do it? Is it just a matter of like, I'm just going to do it and just do it? Or is there a psychological thing that we have to trick ourselves into doing?
In a study James Clear participated in where they looked at people with weight loss as a goal, they had three groups. The first group, they just said, hey, you want to lose weight over time. This is what you want to have, sort of a simplified goal. The second group, they provided motivation every day. Like, we're going to get you motivated, and then they still had a goal. The third group basically had a goal, and they had a specific tracking device that said, I'm going to work out at least 2 times a week on whatever day it was, and they tracked it. When they finished this whole study, the group that had done the third group that had basically wanted the same goal, no motivation, but just started. And this is what he talks about. They just started, because a lot of times they didn't feel like it. There's a lady he quotes that said, I work out every day an hour and a half. It's extremely hard, she says, but the only thing I have to do is get out of bed, put my clothes on, and hail a cab to the gym. And then my workout is complete. I'll do it when I get to the gym. So a lot of times for people, it's the cues. We've got to understand that it is whatever we want. If we really wanted it bad enough, we typically will get to it. But the fact that we don't have it means, like you said, we're not doing the things that we have to do. Marcus Aurelius said one of my favorite quotes. I have a few sitting around, and this is one of them. It says, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. So if there's something that you really passionately want to achieve and you're not doing, you've got to realize there's probably no easy way to get there, and it's going to be hard. So you've got to set the table to allow that the habits to eventually develop the character of that person. And he has 4 basic laws that James Clear talks about. And the first one is that you've got to have a cue. You've got to make it obvious. If you say, I want to read, and you're not reading, I mean, this is a tough one for me. I listen to a lot. We're in a digital era, but I do need to read more. He said, you've got to make it obvious. If you want to read every night before you go to bed, put your book on your pillow. You've got to make these steps more simple. If you have a problem with sugar and food, the easiest way to get rid of it is just clear your house. Like, give it to somebody. Give it to the homeless. Give it to somebody who needs food. Get it out of the way. Google had an interesting experience at their place in California. They didn't remove the bad drinks, the soft drinks and the sugar drinks. They just moved water to the front of every one of the coolers, and within 2 to 3 weeks, it was like 52% increase in water drinking. And they asked people at the tables, why are you drinking water? No, and nobody really knew why. It was obvious. So the first thing is, if you want something, you've got to start making the habit that's going to develop that obvious.
I love that you said, put the book on your pillow before you leave. So when you come home and you get ready to go to bed, you see the book there. That's just for reading. But those are the kind of steps that I think that when you have to make these changes, you have to do certain things like that. I love that. The other thing, let's go back real quick to improve 1% a day. So what does that look like? I mean, because if you take 100% and we're only going to improve 1% a day, what does that, I mean, like, so if somebody says, I'm going to stop swearing, in other words, I'm only going to say one less swear word today than I would tomorrow and keep that pattern, or how does that look? Like what does 1% a day better look like?
For me, I think the most important thing people need to do is notice where they are. And every morning I get up and I spend probably 20 minutes handwriting what my day looks like, and I reflect upon what happened yesterday. To me, it's this awareness. Okay, what did I do yesterday, first of all? Because we've talked about this. I think we wake up every morning and we have, I call it the athlete. He's the guy for me that does all the stuff during the day. And then I have a guy in the corner who's taking notes. And whether we like it or not, he's taking notes of everything I do that day. Most of us go through life and we don't even look at the notes that guy took. We don't even sit at the end of the day and say, okay, this is what happened. Oh, you know what? I probably could have done a little better here and here and here. And believe me, there's every day that every one of us could have done a little better in a lot of areas. Then there's the third guy I call the director. And he can step in and he can start to change the script a little bit and say, you know what? There's no way we're going to fix the 42 blunders or 42,000 blunders you made today. But let's focus on this area. And in the process of focusing on this area tomorrow, and then I wake up and look at it, it'll probably have a carryover somewhere else. So for me, it's being aware of where we are, noticing exactly what goes on in our life, noticing where we're maybe, an A, and then there's other areas where an F, and slowly making changes and enjoying the process. In Hollywood, they talk about mistakes. And yet if you break the word down of a mistake, it's the exact same word. We have multiple mistakes in our life, and yet we just call them, oh, it's a mistake. It's instead of, hey, we can do this again, and we can do it again, and we can do it again. So for me, it's noticing. James Clear has a quote that everybody should have somewhere. And if you think about this quote, I think it's fabulous. He says, every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. No single instance will transform your beliefs, but as the votes build up, so does the evidence of your identity. This is why habits are crucial. They cast repeated votes for being a type of person. So if you want to write a book, you've got to become a writer. So if you're casting a vote every day, every time you should write for 15 minutes, but your vote is to go play PlayStation or to go watch useless media or whatever, you're casting a vote for a lazy character. So you shouldn't be surprised a year later when the book isn't written because you didn't become a writer. And when you think about this, we cast votes for politicians and it's serious. They spend a year or two campaigning for one vote. And every day we cast hundreds of votes for who we will become someday.
I love that. That's a great analogy. That's something that I can grasp onto and learn from for sure. Well, I think for the challenge this week, I guess, is to improve 1% better, to look at our lives and see what we can do better and take notes of what we're doing every day. I like how you broke down that you're three separate people in your same body with different actions that you take. Is there anything else we need to add into this podcast about improving 1%?
In his book, he talks about a few things to help people a little bit more implement all this stuff. And I think for people a lot of times that are struggling, you think of an airplane leaving L.A. and it's going to New York. If the pilots are off 1%, they land in D.C. So they're making little changes all of the time, but that's just 1% going across the country. So if people want this to stick, if you really want to become this type of character, you've got to implement some things that are going to help you along the way. Most people will ask me, I've stayed at a certain weight much of my life, and they tell me you've got incredible willpower. I have horrible willpower. Give me a hot tamale and I'll eat 10. Give me anything with sugar and I'll continue to eat it. I buy my willpower at the store. And we have to think of those things. We've got to make some of these new habits sort of automatic or at least help us out. So we've got to make what he says invisible. Make them to where it's not obvious. If it's junk food, get it out of your house. Make it unattractive. Reframe your mindset. And with habits, we think of the habits, people are going to come out of this and say, oh, I've got to do this and I've got to do this. Well, there's a lot of us out there, I know me, that have a lot of things I've got to stop doing. So we've got to go reverse too. We've got the 1% that's making us better. There's 1% that's making us worse that we've got to get rid of those. If we smoke, we got to stop smoking. I mean, these are obvious things. If we are an alcoholic, we've got to stop drinking. So we've got to pay as much attention to the things we've got to start doing, and then maybe pick something that you've got to stop doing. So for a lot of people, I would say 1%. Okay, what's 1% I can do better to do that I'm not doing? And what's 1% thing I can stop doing? Maybe I need to stop doing this. If people just did that, pick 2 things a year, they would probably have at least a 1% improvement every day. So look at the plus ones and the minus ones, Brian Johnson calls them.
Yeah, the scary part about that is what really hit home. You say, well, if we're not getting 1% better, we could be getting 1% worse every single day and that would just keep taking you down and down and down. And then you see in some people's lives, they get to that point to where it's like Depressionville, and it's life is not, they don't find any joy or happiness in their life. So I think the principle of improving 1% every day versus not improving or doing something bad once a day, and that 1% going down, there's a huge gap there. And it's hard to just stay idle in the middle either, because that's just, you don't feel satisfaction of either way. So, I mean, I've learned something today. I'm glad that you shared that with us. I appreciate you doing all the homework that you do and all the studies that you do, and hanging out with all the self-improving gurus that help multi-million, trillion-dollar companies. I know you rub shoulders with those guys and pick their brains, that you can help us and give us the stuff that you've learned. So I appreciate you, Mr. Friend.
It's always a lot of fun. Thanks, man.
It's all good.